Kia ora. So I just wanted to talk, make a video about the steps up until this point. So yeah, finished off engraving the bottom part of the leather, which is the part where I had to connect the top, so the opening and closing essentially. It was that front panel that came down and closed and then attached itself to the bottom panel, so that whole front face was one padded, but it was separated by the opening and closing flap. So yeah, there was a bit of trickiness around figuring that out. Like, it made sense when it was flat, but because the bag was going to be concaved, or the other one, where there was going to be a curve, it was kind of trickier to figure out with that curve, was it going to sit the same? Like, was the puhoro coming from the top going to connect to the puhoro at the bottom if it kind of puffed out a bit? So yeah, that was something to think about. I think I did a mock-up design, stitching to get an idea of how the top flap was going to sit when it came down, and then I kind of drew from there where it was going to meet, so that really helped. Yeah, so then basically, yeah, it was a lot easier after that. I was a bit more confident that it was going to reach, and because I didn't know how much bend was necessary, because it was flat, and I didn't know how much it actually needed to bend over to then reach down, because I lost a lot of space in that bending because of the bag was actually quite thick. Yeah, but it worked. It definitely worked, which was cool. I was happy with it. It wasn't too offsetted. And then I moved on to dyeing the leather. So yeah, like I talked about, there was a few different colors that I was thinking of using, and I think any really would have looked good, to be fair. I did want to try and keep it sort of as much of the color as it was, because I really liked that sort of browny, light brown. I wanted it to be more skin-like coloured, and not to lose the tamuho tattooing part that was on the back of the bag. So the lighter it was going to be, the better, I think, and the more you'd be able to see the design and the pattern, and the more it kind of held its leather-like colour, which I really like. So tested it on a strip of old leather that I tattooed. Tested the dark brown, or the light brown maybe, and then tested the tan. It was really only going to be between those two colours. I didn't really feel like I wanted it to be red, although it could have been red. That would have been another one, which I think could have looked quite cool. But yeah, again, wanted just to keep it the colour of skin. And then, so yeah, tested it on there, and then that worked. I could still see the tattooing ink, so yeah, that was cool. And then yeah, basically just went ahead and dyed it. I think at this point I probably could have used a sponge if I'd had one, just to sponge on the dye, rather than what I've talked about is that when I was using this cloth that I had to like wipe essentially the ink onto the dye onto the leather. Yeah, it's because when I was tattooing it, I couldn't, like, normally when you tattoo, and then you sort of wipe away the top layer of ink that stays, but I couldn't really do that, because if I'd wiped the ink, then yeah, it like stains the leather, so I kind of just had to tattoo and leave it as much as I could. And then unfortunately when I wiped the dye on, I mean, it probably could have been obvious, but yeah, anyway, yeah, it sort of wiped some of the top layer of the top layer of the tattooing ink off. Just kind of smudged it, really. You can kind of get away with it. I probably wouldn't do it again, but hey, it was the first time doing it, so it's okay. It's not a huge mistake, just something to learn from. Yeah, other than that, most of the dyeing, process worked well. It actually looks really nice when you do dye it once you've engraved it, because it starts to highlight the indents all kind of get dyed, and you get a nice contrast between the resin parts of the leather and the other parts that have sunken down to create the shapes. Yeah, so that actually worked really well. And then I moved on to the strapping. Yeah, so the stitching of the bag, and that was pretty cool. I really liked this part. It was definitely a part that I was looking forward to, because I could actually see it all come together and actually look like the bag was going to work, and to create, I guess, the bag shape that I wanted. There was definitely a lot of satisfaction in this part. So I had to dye the straps first. So the straps I used was just kind of off a roll that was already thin. It was just thin strapping leather. So I think it's you actually use it for stitching like this, to sort of attaching two pieces together. So yeah, I had all my holes, dyed the leather panels, then dyed the strap, and then sort of had to really it took a long time, just to thread the strapping through in and out of the holes, and then having to pull it tight at the corners and then curve in the corners. So I wet the leather a bit to shape it so it was softer, and then pulling the string tight, pulling it out, tightening it, pulling it out, tightening it. So my fingers really hurt after this, actually, because there's a lot of tightening and pulling little pieces to sort of try and tighten it more. So that worked really well. The thing that I learned here, which was a mistake, was that I did an uneven amount of holes. So once I started out and then threaded in, so that the knot would be on the inside of the bag that would hold there, and you wouldn't be able to see that. It would sort of just pull and then get locked in because there was a big knot. But on the other end of the bag, it was on the outside because there wasn't any more holes to bring it back in and then tie it. So I either had the option of tying the knot on the outside of the bag, and leaving it like that, or having an extra hole and having the knot on the inside. But I sort of thought I'd rather not have an empty hole and make it look like, because then I think there's a bit more of an obvious mistake there, which is funny. But no, that worked well, and I was really happy. So lesson for next time would be to make sure I have the right amount of holes, to not allow for that. But other than that, it worked pretty much just as well. I was able to, because you only dye one side of the leather, I was able to sort of stitch it in a way that only the dyed was on the outside, and then when it went threaded through, it was the underneath of the leather strapping that was on the inside. So all of the outside stitching is the dyed part and looks flush. So that worked really well. And then the bag was sort of together, and then it was kind of time after that to put on the strapping, so this bit that was going to go over the shoulder and hold the bag to the shoulder, and then the last bit was to put on the buckle to clip the bag down, the flap down, and then clip it there.